That's a good one.
I don't see what's happening, so I have no idea.
It's
Teacher
it's
of-
alarming.
It's alarming. I don't know how to change it. Oh no. Oh,
Even better.
okay, that's my new. Oh, it's not supposed to do that. All right. We've got some time, and the chairman isn't here. I'll try and figure out what to do.
I think we have an IT person who can help us with this stuff if we need it.
That's what it's Trevor. Help me!
Yeah, I haven't yet seen these unique features that you're leveraging.
Look at that.
I made you young. Which one's
I know.
that?
It's called
Quite-
Remove Beard.
Yeah, quite the filters.
As soon as the chairman shows up, I'll stop playing.
I think we're already live, so
Oh, it's all right.
I guess there's many new ways that you could ask for an opportunity to speak.
There, exactly.
That's a pretty good one, Jeff. I like it. Nick here.
It's almost like I have hair again. I haven't found a filter that will just give me lovely hair, but one of these days.
If you find that one, can you share it with a few
yes,
of us?
that would be. It'd be very popular. All right, now how do I just turn them off? Uh-oh. I may just have to stop the camera. Settings. Camera. Sorry, Mr. Chair. It was my version of getting myself hair. There we go. I'm back to me.
Just waiting to see Councillor Morrow, see if he's having some challenges getting back on Teams again. Yeah, we'll just wait one more moment for Councillor Miyashiro, or for Councillor Morrow.
shall I take the opportunity to remind us it's 10 months to Christmas? I shouldn't be that person.
It's 1 month to our anniversary. Oh gosh, less. It's 3 weeks to our anniversary. And we were supposed to do our cruise last year, so we put it off till this year. I think it's not happening.
Have you considered a cruise down the Old Man River?
I'll do a tire float. It'll be just as good.
All right, I see Councillor Morrow has appeared, so Councillor Morrow, you're good?
Yes, thank you.
Excellent, thank you. Okay, I'm going to try to navigate multiple devices here. Okay, I'll call the meeting of the Governance Standing Policy Committee for Thursday, February 25th to order. We'll start with the acknowledgement statement. Acknowledge that City of Lethbridge acknowledges that we're gathered on the lands of the Blackfoot people of the Canadian Plains, and we pay respect to the Blackfoot people past, present, and future, while recognizing and respecting their cultural heritage, beliefs, and relationships to the land. The City of Lethbridge is also located within Region 3 of the Métis Nation of Alberta. Mr. Westerson, if I could have a roll call, please.
Certainly, Mr. Chair. Councillor Morrow.
Yeah,
Councillor Carlson.
Present.
Councillor Croson.
Good afternoon.
Councillor Kaufman.
Present.
All present and accounted for.
Excellent, thank you very much. Do we have any other members of council in attendance, either in the chamber with you, Mr. Westerson? I don't see any additional members online.
There are no additional members that we can see online, and there are no additional members of council or administration in the chamber, excepting myself and Ms. Crisanti.
Great, thank you very much. Everybody has had an opportunity, I hope, to review the minutes from our last meeting. Are there any error omissions? No, sorry, I've skipped ahead. I'm trying to open my agenda on there. There we go. Adoption of the agenda, actually. Any additions to the agenda? Okay, hearing none. By consent, are we good? Hearing nods, not hearing any discontent with that, we'll move on. Section 3, the consent agenda, the approval of the governance minutes, the SPC governance minutes from January 28th, and the status of initiatives. Are there any questions on either of those? Okay, hearing none, by consent, we will accept the minutes and the status of initiatives. Move into presentations. Presentation 4.1, Trevor Butler, General Manager IT, RE IT Fiscal and Operational Performance Review Recommendations Update. Mr. Butler, good afternoon and welcome.
Thank you very much. We'll just wait for this deck to go and view, which I can see now. Thank you for the opportunity from members of committee to be here today with the purpose of providing an update on the IT recommendations coming out of phase 1 of the KPMG review. I do want to, first of all, acknowledge a very significant body of work. It's always a lot of work that come behind these slide decks. So thank you to our IT teams, both in corporate IT and those across in business units, consultants that have worked with us, corporate communications that has helped us roll this out. And of course, our city manager and members of our senior leadership team who have reviewed and participated at different levels in these recommendations and particularly in the initiatives. Next slide, please. Just a high-level review of the 6 recommendations to remind members of committee what some of their buckets of work happen to be. It was important as when we first reviewed these to realize that they were not 6 mutually exclusive recommendations, and in fact many of them are interconnected, and so instead of moving one at a time, we have grouped these in an effort to move them forward, ultimately advancing our operating model. Next slide, please. The first initiative, which we refer to as our Information and Technology Governance Framework, specifically focuses on the 3 bolded recommendations, number 1, number 3, and number 4. The ampersand between information and technology is very important, as it is not a technology governance framework, but looking at both the information and the technology side of our city and moving those services forward. Next slide, please. Given that this is the Governance Standing Policy Committee, I won't get into a conversation on what governance is outside of saying it's how we direct, it's how we monitor, it's how we control the different investments at the city. Next slide, please. The overview of this specific initiative and its purpose was to look at how do we direct and approve technology and information initiatives and services, how do we monitor them for performance, how do we evaluate, and how do we approve them. Next slide, please. There were a number of challenges and opportunities as we went through a particular process to look at our current governance, to identify what we wanted as a future governance, and of course the gaps in between and the initiatives we needed to undertake. We were looking at how do we produce transparency, how do we improve communication, and specifically the clarity of who makes decisions relative to information and technology. We also wanted to focus on prioritizing the right work for the organization, as we will always be constrained in the number of resources we have and what we can actually take on. And of course, we wanted to look at removing waste and duplication, understanding our risks, and providing opportunities to innovate and to be nimble. Next slide, please. According to best...
Just before you continue, Mr. Butler, can I just ask if people are not speaking to ensure that their mute is on, please? We're getting a bit of a hiss or a feedback. Thank you. Thank you.
Okay. There are, according to best practice, 5 key areas when we look at information and technology governance, 5 buckets, if you will, as identified on the screen that we need to be considering, which we did. And it's important to note that the numbering on the side do not mean priority or sequence, but just a numbered list. As we went through this work, we of course identified where we were, where we wanted to go, and we can go to the next slide, which will indicate the visual of the overall governance framework in which has been developed and we have been moving forward on, once again, to address those first 3 areas of recommendations. Everything in the lighter blue color will identify new or kind of repurposed areas of our previous governance structure, and it is important to have the darker colors on there recognizing council and senior management and how this governance structure fits into those 2 larger bodies. Key to this governance structure is the establishment of what we call an Information and Technology Steering Committee, which is chaired by our city manager, and members of it are our divisional directors, being not an advisory but a decision-making body relative to the different initiatives and services as they relate to information and technology. And that steering committee has the scope of all information and technology across the city, regardless what business unit it may be in and whether corporate IT supports that technology or not. Inside of the box underneath of there represents 4 subcommittees that are proposed and are being stood up at this time, focusing on those 5 key decision buckets that a previous slide referenced, and everything outside of that are pieces that were in place before with previous governance structures. Next slide, please. You'll find the overall roadmap and timeline in which we're working according. We did begin this work far before June, but it was important for us to pause to give a chance for our city manager to be with us here in Lethbridge to get his direction and his guidance as we move forward on this governance structure, ultimately working to stand up the various different parts of this governance structure and have them operational by the end of May. Next slide, please. The second initiative which we have worked on to move forward our KPMG recommendation is referred to as our IT work management initiative that focuses on automating and streamlining our core processes inside of the IT department. Next slide, please. When we talk about the core process of IT, they're not unique to us at the city. There aren't really different IT processes in a municipality as compared to other organizations. And so we utilize a best practice framework known as IT Service Management, or ITSM, which the image to the right references the different components and different processes in that framework. And we're largely targeting those on the outside ring, which are green in color. Next slide, please. Our purpose of this particular initiative was to look at our digital workflows, to look at how we do our work, the processes we use to support the variety of services that are leveraged across the city, to unlock productivity of our employees, and to focus on those service delivery, realizing that when our technology services are unavailable, it oftentimes means, if not always, that it impacts service delivery directly to our citizens. We wanted to review our manual processes that we may have, align them to best practice, and to move forward. We also wanted to move towards a single platform in how we manage this work. Underneath, you will, on this particular image, you'll see the 6 different key areas around ITSM that we are focusing as far as this initiative. Next slide, please. As part of launching this service and reviewing all of our processes, we have launched what we call an IT service portal, which is the single point of contact to request everything you might need from corporate IT, from seeking help when something is broken to acquiring new services. This portal is very important for us because it's designed similar to the world of Amazon, where you should be able to shop for what you need. You should be able to know exactly where it is on the process and anticipate when it will be delivered, which this portal allows us to do. The link at the bottom is how you would get to it. It is available to anybody with a University of Lethbridge account today. Next slide, please. You'll also find the project timeline that we've been working on. We started back in September of 2019, going out to market, looking for both a product and a partner to work with us on this. We launched what's called the ITBM module back in April of 2020, which is how we go from the conception of a project all the way to the delivery of its benefits and operationalizing it. That went live last April. The service portal that I just showed you, it went live on November the 3rd, which is how you request work, new services, report incidents. Our last part of this particular initiative is actually new processes that we're formalizing as we look at idea, innovation, demand, change, a number of different modules. We're looking there to move forward our practices with the intention that will conclude at the end of April this year. And we do estimate that we're roughly 75% complete this particular initiative. Next slide, please. We have had a number of great accomplishments with this particular project. Key to that is a very efficient use of our funds, as we're significantly under budget for our project. This is due to a few things. One, we can thank COVID for this because there were no travel costs, and we used Teams to deliver this entire project. We've also made a deliberate choice that we're not that unique, and we're staying out of the box, and we're not customizing the tool sets that we are using. There are some numbers there on the page as far as how much work we've taken in and delivered through this particular product and initiative, realizing that this was a significant activity to review our processes. Next slide, please. To conclude, there are still 2 remaining initiatives that are scheduled to work on. There might be some animation with this one, Ms. Crisanti, if you want to click next and see what happens. We do have a user fee structure review that is in the works that is on hold, waiting for phase 4. This is largely a financial review in which we'll work with finance on to review this fee structure that has been in place for many, many years, and it's how we fund a lot of the work with information technology. And we also have a reorganization and restructure that is aligned to the larger corporate restructure, which I believe the city manager has talked to members of council about. Next slide, please. And that, of course, it concludes my comments today, and I'm happy to answer any questions and express my appreciation for sharing the information today.
Thank you very much, Mr. Butler. If I had that speed of downloading here at home, I could probably stream multiple devices. So thank you for going through that amount of information quite quickly. Questions from the committee? Councillor Crowson.
Thank you. There was a lot of information in here, but a few things. Let's start with what's maybe on top of mind. Under your key governance areas, under the buckets, you have governance of risks. I don't think there's anyone who's not talking about solar winds, et cetera, right now, and all the issues around that. So as you're going through this, and I know we've talked about this before, how are we overviewing risks? What are we doing? I know we've been doing training, but in this governance piece on risks, what are we doing?
Yeah, absolutely. So this is setting up more of a formal practice on all the different types of risks that's out there. Key to this is our larger cybersecurity program that was brought to council in the last operating budget. And so there's a lot of work that we're doing, being proactive, for example, scanning our network to identify where there may be vulnerabilities. We've talked before about employee awareness, phishing scams, all of those types of things. So we're actively looking at what those threats might be out there. Specific to the SolarWinds, we actually do use that product, but not the versions that came under popularity in the news that were breached. And so I spend a lot of time with the group known as NCIP, which is a national cybersecurity commission that we work with the Cyber Center to understand all these threats that are out there and working to remediate the ones that we're aware of to close that risk gap, recognizing that we can't get to zero. There's always going to be some risk out there, but we're proactive approaching those both through this governance structure and the other services that we operate.
Talk to me a little bit about what you call shadow IT. I have to imagine that's some of our business units trying to circumnavigate things because they have issues they need to solve. Is that what you mean by shadow IT?
Yeah, so there's different types of IT. There's a corporate IT, which is what I run. There's business unit IT, which are those that are sanctioned in business units. We usually use the example of police IT as example. And then we have another bucket that kind of organically emerges to meet needs that are out there. And that's a key part of our governance structure, is to produce transparency so we know all the work that's going on around the city, and really eradicate the concept of these shadow IT groups, but to have everybody work together on the initiatives that they're running, bringing those to a steering committee so investment decisions can be made.
So becoming aware of it and then figuring out how to tie it into the organization.
Yeah, it's really important on those ones that it's easy these days to invest in technology. It can be as simple as a credit card and a cloud service, and away we go, or not even a credit card. Because we can subscribe to different services just in a trial basis. All of that can create unknown risks. And that's why that transparency is absolutely key.
Okay, just to sort of tie this all up, and I don't know why there's some kind of black shadow behind me, to tie this all up, the why we're doing this. What's the end result? What's going to be the end result for the resident, the customer, and what's going to be the end result, the impact on the corporation when this is all said and done?
Are you referring to the governance framework?
Yeah. When you've gone through your work here, when you've implemented the KPMG stuff, how will the resident of Lethbridge be impacted? Will they notice anything? Will they get better customer service? Why are we doing this? What's the end result?
Sure. Thank you for the question. So looking at the two different initiatives that I shared today, the first one around governance is to ensure that we're investing in the right work as it relates to information and technology. So we're delivering the right services to our citizens in the right way, in the most effective way possible, which one of those big opportunities is the reduction of waste. And so we're leveraging those tax funds for the most important work that we can. The other one is the second initiative, which was around reviewing our processes. And there's a significant amount of work in there, ultimately focusing on the best service delivery we can, which means a reduction in service outages. Many of our business units are very dependent as we work with them on the technology that we deliver to them so they can deliver services to citizens. And as we can improve those services and reduce any downtime in those services, it means more consistent service to the citizen, whether that's booking swim lessons or riding transit or whatever that might be. So all of which to improve the service delivery directly to our citizen.
So to sum it up, if this all goes through the way it's supposed to, better service, lower cost.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Carlson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Mr. Butler. Appreciate the information and the explanations to the information. A question I had, a couple of mine were already answered through your responses to Councillor Crowson. Talking about the governance framework or governance structure, if you can. You've got council at the top, appreciate that. I don't see any, especially this SPC in there at all, or is that contemplated as council?
Yeah, so a couple of things. Thank you for the question. That is contemplated as council. When we built this, the SPCs were not in place yet, but I do see that, yeah, all of that bucket is representative of council.
Okay, thank you for that. And further to that, how do you see a council providing good governance on this? How often is the reporting? How often is council involved? And how can we ensure that we are providing good governance, but also not getting in the way or in the weeds?
Thank you. Is your question on how do we direct those investments that are across the corporation?
And is that typically what you're counting on council for? Is just the investments rather than?
Yeah, not entirely. So I think there's a lot of opportunities from looking at council's strategic goals and priorities, looking at when we go through new initiative, CIP, operating budget, all of that work where council has the ability to provide direction on where we're to invest in the future, and that's where I see a lot of that direction also coming back to this committee itself to report on how this governance structure is going, the benefits which we're realizing, the challenges that we might be having, all of that being opportunities for members of council and its committees to direct our efforts moving forward.
Okay, thank you. That's kind of what I wanted to hear, that it was all regarding sort of high level vision and strategies. Excellent. Yep. Maybe Mr. Chair, through you, is our city manager here, or if not, maybe I can ask Mr. Butler. Forgive me for not. Here, yeah. Oh, excellent. Forgive me for not being aware, but I'm sure they're administrative policies. But is there some point that we should be reviewing, not approving because they would be administrative, but there may be also some high-level governance policies. Are there any policies that we should be aware of and be in review of, or are those being created?
I'm not quite sure. I understand the question, Councillor Carlson. Maybe Trevor, are you aware of any council policies that would be impacted by this? Is that the question, Councillor Carlson?
Council policies, possibilities, perhaps. I'm thinking more of administrative policies that may be in there when we're discussing risk management, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I'm assuming there are policies. I don't review all of your policies, unfortunately, or fortunately for me. But I'd like to be aware that they're in existence and there aren't any gaps. Is my only thought, not a concern.
I'm happy to respond to that. As an initial response, there are a number of policies that would relate. For example, around integrated risk management, there would be insurance programs in place, for example, associated with that risk, with our cyber risk policies that are in place. There's also purchasing policies that are in place that all govern how these pieces work. Part of the review of standing this up is to look at a number of those to identify if there's any changes. As an example, it is common in some of our municipalities around Edmonton and through some of our work that you would find internal administrative policies on how you engage the corporation in information and technology projects, ultimately pushing things towards this particular governance framework, and it's followed, so you don't find exceptions to that. So I would answer this, there's both policies in place that we'll need to look at and possibly some new ones that we'll want to consider to encourage this framework to be adhered to.
Excellent. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
You're welcome. If I can just, as a reminder to you, Councillor Carlson, all members of this committee as well, don't forget that Audit Committee is actually expanding a little bit of its role and is looking at some of the what we've traditionally called administrative policies. And so I do not recall from the top of my head if Deputy Mayor Miyashiro were participating. Welcome, Councillor Hagan. I see that you're here. If Deputy Mayor Mayashiro was participating, I'm certain he could have a little bit more to say, but Audit Committee is expanding a bit of its scope in terms of oversight of policy into administrative policy. This may actually be one of them. We deal with an awful lot of risk, obviously, and recognition of risk in many factors and all factors of the organization. So this might actually fall under them. I can't say that for sure, but there would certainly be an element of some aspect of council oversight.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Appreciate that. The answers that I got here were all what I was hoping to hear, so thank you for that.
Thank you. Councillor Morrow, do you have any questions?
No.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Butler, just to sort of follow up on what Councillor Carlson was heading at, can you give me an example of a type of a governance decision that council would engage in based on your governance framework?
Yeah, that's a good question. Much of what we're looking at here is how we manage our existing technologies, such as we could engage in a significant project that may review our enterprise systems and propose direction forward, such as a replacement of JD Edwards and PeopleSoft, which are two tools that we have. That may not be something that is funded. That is a very large initiative that I would propose that would move beyond the steering committee and come to council and maybe a number of the SPCs to ultimately get direction on whether that was an initiative that council desired for us to move forward on.
Okay, so it's this relationship between governance and actually making decisions on direction versus governance and responding through a budget for capital or operating. So right. The reason I raise it is if Mr. Dalton, did you want to add something? I see that your microphone's off.
Oh, sorry. I was just going to say that, yeah, my perspective is it's really on the procurement side of the house. And it would be those sort of major decisions that might change the direction we're heading as a corporation. And the other one, and it might be more appropriate for audit committee, is the risk piece. Those are the two areas where I think council governance really comes into play.
But when we're talking about major decisions, as you state, we're talking about we need a budget to replace JD Edwards or to acquire some massive technology that meets the needs of the organization. So it's not governance in the sense of policy direction or policy oversight as much as it is just control of the budget. Okay, I just need the clarity in that. So by your governance framework that you proposed, really the IT steering committee is the governing body. When that body deems that we don't have the resources to achieve X, you're coming to council with the plan laid out. Okay. All right. Thank you for the clarification on that. Just wanted to double check your words as well. When Councillor Crowson asked about sort of the shadow IT, business units have their own IT software and whatnot to fulfill their jobs. All of that is, I think the word you used was sanctioned. All of that is sanctioned. All of that is approved through some process as well. I can't be in a business unit and just bring in my own piece of software. There has to be an approval process, correct?
That's right. There's a project procurement process that would be followed to acquire that technology, regardless of which business unit it's utilized or supported through.
Okay, thank you. When you talk about the core IT processes as well, just getting it clear in my mind, this is a fundamental framework. It doesn't matter whether we're talking about internal or inward-facing processes or outward-facing. So serving the corporation, serving the organization, or serving the public, the core IT processes are the umbrella that encapsulates all of that, correct?
That's right.
Okay, so your presentation is not just about what we're doing to serve the organizations, but what we're doing to serve the community, which includes the organization, but includes the people who live here.
It is recognizing that IT is an internal service provider, so the technologies that we deploy for business units are used to deploy services to our citizens.
Okay, thank you. I don't see anybody with their hand up. Final question for me. When you talk about the IT service portal, you said it's been live since November.
That's correct. Yep, okay. That's correct.
But you said you can access it if you have a University of Lethbridge email.
Oh, sorry, I'll apologize. I spent 15 years at that institution as an employee, so I I apologize for that confusion. I'm referring, although the institution is important to us, as are their students, I'm referring to a corporate email address with the city of Lethbridge.
So it explains why when you said that, I went on and used my University of Lethbridge email address, but couldn't log in. So
Yeah.
thank you. It's obviously got a good firewall, so thank you.
Yeah.
And is this portal internal or external? Yeah, obviously it's internal. I have to have a City of Lethbridge email.
Yes, so you
Okay.
would be able to access it externally, but it is an internal facing portal to deliver internal services.
Okay, excellent. Thank you very much. Councillor Higgins, you're the only other member of council present. Did you have any questions on the presentation?
I'm trying another computer. Hopefully, can you hear me?
Yes, I see you on the screen twice now.
No, thanks. No, I do not. Thanks very much, Mr. Chair.
All right, thank you. Members of the committee, are there any other questions? Seeing none, hearing none. Thank you very much, Mr. Butler. I appreciate the presentation, the information. There's lots here to digest. And it looks like you're taking this in a very exciting direction, and look forward to hearing the results.
Thank you. Yes, we're trying to take a very aggressive approach moving forward to show results there.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Mr. Westerson, if you have a motion, are you able to put it up on the screen since I can't call it up on either of my devices?
It should be popping up there now.
Excellent. Super. Thank you. Moving back on my device.
Mr. Malcolm, Heart of Our City is next.
Excellent. Mr. Malcolm, Heart of Our City, and I went too far back. Governance report, implementation plan, and terms of reference amendments. Thank you, Ms. Crisanti. I appreciate that. Mr. Malcolm, please go ahead.
Thank you very much, and good afternoon, members of Governance SPC. So today I'm joined by the Heart of Our City's Chair, Lorianne Johansson. She's going to introduce today's presentation, and then I will take over from her. I do apologize that the slides are heavy in text, but we wanted to provide as much information in advance for everyone on this call, as well as the general public who might be interested in this. But we will go pretty quickly and are open to questions and going back to provide clarity after the presentation is complete. So with that, I will turn things over to Lorianne. Next slide, please.
Good afternoon. I'm Lorianne Johansson, and I'm the newly elected chair of the Heart of Our City Committee. It is my pleasure to be co-presenting to you today regarding the governance review and subsequent implementation plan and the amendments to the HOCC terms of reference. Next slide, please. Since 2007, the Heart of Our City Master Plan has been the overarching vision and framework document guiding our revitalization efforts, which has been a coordinated partnership between the HOCC, the BRZ, and the URD. Next slide, please. The downtown and greater urban core has experienced significant changes and challenges through those 12 years, and we recognize the mixed feelings throughout our community, specifically around the effectiveness in the work and the different roles each organization fills within this partnership. Next slide, please. Urban core revitalization is at a critical point, and there is no way to sugarcoat it. We have several major hurdles in front of us, and prudence demanded that we reassess and reevaluate our processes and deeply examine the status quo to ensure that we are in the best position possible as we move through these hurdles, meeting them head on with efficiency and effectiveness. Next slide, please. The immediate result of this recognition was to undertake the retention of WMC, a third-party organization, to conduct an in-depth governance review. I would invite Andrew to take over again and to further explain the details of that governance review, the implementation plan, and the necessary amendments to the terms of reference. Thank you. Andrew?
Thanks, Lorianne. So if we could move one slide forward to the executive summary. Thank you. So following the extensive review, which included interview, research, and analysis, WMC, our consultants, determined that the Heart of Our City Master Plan was a sound document that should be utilized as our framework going forward. Through their work, they've identified the need for clarity in roles and responsibilities, stronger business planning, and performance measurement criteria to ensure that the goals identified are being achieved. They stressed that the work that we've been doing is very good, but adjustments are needed to be able to ensure that we are moving forward as best we can. Next slide, please. I'm going to skip this one because I think I'd be reiterating myself. So next slide, please. So through the governance report, there were 6 recommendations provided. I won't read them off the slide as we'll probably touch on them later in this presentation. So next slide, please. One of the core findings of this project or this effort was identifying and addressing confusion over roles and responsibilities in the intersection of the Urban Revitalization Department, the Heart of Our City Committee, and the Downtown BRZ. There's strong belief that these groups have worked very hard, but that there has been overlap and duplication that was unintendedly created through the original structure. This diagram, this Venn diagram, will be something that you'll see throughout the presentation, which offers a very simplistic way to identify a more streamlined and intuitive structure that will be hopefully put in place to enhance future success. Next slide, please. There is additional information in the governance review, which I encourage you to take a read through if you're interested, including service review findings and assessments of the 3 organizations, comparison of programs from other downtown revitalization organizations and efforts, and a financial analysis. This information will be critical to how we actually roll forward with the 6 recommendations previously stated. Next slide, please. So the governance review report provided by WMC provided those recommendations, but it did not provide any next steps or actions for which any of the 3 organizations were to put into place. So with that, the steering committee of the members of the Heart of Our City, the BRZ, and the Urban Revitalization Department met to put together an implementation plan. Next slide, please. So the first recommendation was that the Heart of Our City Master Plan should be reaffirmed as the framework document for revitalization. So under each of these recommendations is a reflective action that we will be moving forward with. This first action was to amend the Heart of Our City terms of reference, including the mandate, which is part of the presentation today. Next slide, please. The second recommendation was around establishing clear roles and responsibilities for the Heart of Our City, the Downtown BRZ, and the Urban Revitalization Department, realigning onto their primary focus areas. So there is 1 action per organization in this section of the implementation plan. Action 2.1 is the amendment of the Heart of Our City terms of reference, including roles and responsibilities, and again, falls as part of today's presentation. Action 2.2 is for the BRZ, and that's to look at their bylaw, which is currently in place, which has been in place without amendment since 1987. And the third piece is to look to support the Urban Revitalization Department by exploring opportunities to integrate with real estate and land. And that item is also a part of recommendation 5, where there's more details. Next slide, please. The third recommendation was strategic focus for individual and coordinated activities, specifically about building strategic and tactical plans that align with the outcomes of all the groups. So there's 3 actions here. 1 is to develop an interim strategic plan that will kind of bridge the gap and get us over the next 2-year period. With that is a work plan that specifically identifies what the roles are of each of the organizations in accomplishing that strategic plan. And then the third action is that into next year in 2022, we would look to develop a 4-year strategic plan, which would help inform the next operating budget cycle, as the work is highly dependent on that approval. Next slide, please. Once the strategic work plans are put in place, it would be about building a solid measurement program. We envision a State of the Downtown report, which would actually pull together the annual reporting of all 3 organizations into one cohesive document that is aligned with that strategic plan. Next slide, please. And the 5th recommendation was to better leverage the capacity of real estate and land development to accomplish the goals. And this is something that we would look to accomplish through the organizational review and the implementation of the KPMG report. Next slide, please. This is a high-level visual of the roadmap, identifying when in the next 2-year window these different actions would take place. Next slide, please. So recognizing that the Civic Works SPC is the parent organization or SPC of the Heart of Our City, you might be asking why we're here. Well, we're here mainly because of this next piece, and that the terms of reference for the governance SPC is to make recommendations as it relates to committee's terms of references. So as I noted, actually, next slide, please. As noted, the first two recommendations, 1A and 2, were focused around terms of reference amendments for the Heart of Our City Committee. And if I could circle the Heart of Our City circle on this Venn diagram, this is really where we're focusing. We're focusing on defining the roles and responsibilities of that Heart of Our City Committee. Next slide, please. So on the next set of slides, I have pulled out and specifically identified where the terms of reference changes are being proposed. And in your agenda package, there would have been an attachment that actually had the terms of references with track changes, so you could see exactly where those changes are being proposed. So this is a high-level identification of where those changes are and why we're looking at them. So in section 2 of the terms of reference under statement of purpose, we are removing the ICSP or MDP reference as well as the downtown ARP and focusing on the Heart of Our City Master Plan. Again, that was why the committee was put in place, was to deliver on the Heart of Our City Master Plan. And because of the hierarchy of plans and that the Heart of Our City Master Plan has to inherently fit within those other plans, it has a little bit of duplication and detracts from the main purpose. Further is replacement of the downtown with the concept of the urban core. This is an expansion of the geographic area that is currently defined within the mandate of the Heart of Our City. And this is timed primarily based on pressures from the outside environment, businesses, and the community. And we'll touch more about that as we go. And further, it's to provide strategic leadership and community engagement, really honing in on the purpose of having a council committee. Next slide, please. So in terms of the boundary or that mandated space, there's a little bit of history here. So the Heart of Our City Master Plan is a document that was much greater than the downtown. So this map on this slide identifies the area that was contemplated within the Heart of Our City Master Plan. And the area that's within the red boundary, that red boundary represents our downtown boundary as reflected in our downtown area redevelopment plan, and also matches up with the boundary district of the downtown BRZ. So you can see that the Heart of Our City Master Plan actually addressed an area greater than what we call downtown. With that being said, in the initial 10-year window of the Heart of Our City Master Plan, the priority was downtown. So since 2007, we have really focused on the scenic, Park Place, Central, and Midtown districts as described in that Heart of Our City Master Plan. In 2018, we expanded beyond that and looked at the Civic District when we focused on it through the Civic Common Master Plan. And then further in 2019 through till today, there has been increasing pressure and desire to focus on these additional areas that make up what we consider the urban core, that being the Center Village and the Upper East Side, or more commonly known today as the Warehouse District. Administratively, we shifted focus a little bit from downtown revitalization to urban revitalization, which primarily took place in actually my job title. Previously, my predecessor held the title of downtown revitalization, and that was changed to urban. And then more recently, council recently has approved or expanded the scope on some grants and incentives that moved beyond that downtown boundary and started to consider more of what we call the urban core as shown in this image. Next slide, please. So the governance review, a little snippet from it, it says, the consultant team, that the method of involving the community and business association in the downtown may well act as a template for establishing similar relationships elsewhere in the city. And so we'll touch on this or can come back to this, but we currently only have one BIA or BRZ, and that's in the downtown. But that's not all we could have. We could have more downtown, or more, sorry, not downtown. We could have more BRZs or BIAs in our community, and this framework would allow us to be positioned to support them in the same or a similar way that we do the downtown BRZ today. Next slide, please. Sorry, I think that one had an animation, so next slide, please. And we'll come back to this one if we have questions. Next slide, please. So for the composition of the committee, or section 3 of the terms of reference, we are currently not proposing any change of the composition for now, although it has been identified for a desire to look at altering the composition by the end of 2021, looking at maybe shifting from a large committee of 13 members, which represents 9 specific organizations, to something along the lines of 7 citizen at large members based on a skills matrix. We would like to offer the opportunity or request the opportunity to speak further to the governance SP on this throughout the year. At this time, it's just been identified as an opportunity. Next slide, please. If you look at the track changes of the terms of reference, this section, duties and responsibilities, has had a complete overhaul. And it's based on providing the clarity on the roles and responsibilities as recommended in the governance review. And that is Appendix 1 of that governance report, if you'd care to take a look at more in depth. Next slide, please. This final page of the amendments just kind of captures all of the other low-hanging fruit or cleanup housekeeping items that we have addressed through this proposal. Nothing significant here, just, again, more housekeeping items. Next slide, please. So just a couple key dates to be aware of. On February 10th, this was presented to the Heart of Our City Committee in its entirety and supported to move forward to this presentation on February 25th. We will be at the Civic Works SPC on March 4th as well, as they are the parent SPC of the Heart of Our City. And then recognizing our other contributors to this presentation will be made at the BRZ AGM on March 8th, sharing with their membership on a lot of this work as well. And if everything goes well today, based on the recommended action of the request for decision, we would hope that these amendments would proceed to council on March 23rd. So with that, I will welcome any questions for myself, and I think Lorianne would be happy to as well.
Thank you very much, Mr. Malcolm. Thank you, Ms. Johansson, as well, and apologies for not welcoming you at the beginning of the meeting, and thank you very much for your participation, your leadership on Heart of the City as well. Do I have any questions from committee members? Perhaps while I'm waiting for hands come up. Just a question on the timing. I don't know if anybody's aware, but there's a municipal election coming up in the end of October. And so when we're talking about aligning this with a strategic plan of council, you're going to have a shift immediately, or here in the near future, at least within a year, for a new council with potentially a new strategic plan. If you're to have the tie-in between the HSC master plan and the strategic plan, is there an intentional lag in terms of development that or recognition of that, or does the current strategic plan align in order to set the master plan, and then it will be amended after the next council?
Thanks for the question. I think when we're talking about the strategic plan in relation to this document and this process, that's a strategic plan for the Heart of Our City Committee, the BRZ, and the Urban Revitalization Department. And so what the hope or the intent would be that we would get something to bridge us the next 2 years so that we're moving forward purposefully. And with the new council coming in, they would put in their new strategic plan, hopefully by the end of 2022, which would allow us in our next 4-year strategic plan to tie directly into that, and also then come forward in the next operating budget and make sure that our request for operating funding is in alignment with both council's new strategic plan and the strategic directions of the 3 organizations.
Okay, thank you. If I can just ask as well before I head to Councillor Crowson, and I don't want to read into it, and I've read through the document provided by the folks at WBC. The duties and responsibilities, of course, as you say, have been completely revamped. Were we straying, and I don't mean that in a negative context in any way, shape, or form, but were we kind of straying through Heart of the City in terms of being connected to the document? Were we just starting to make more decisions based on what we felt we wanted, what we needed, the look of the downtown? I don't want to imply anything there, but I'm just wondering if bringing it back was intentional for partly that reason.
I think it was twofold. One was we collectively couldn't have any conversations with the public, with council, or with the BRZ members without somebody asking the question, what is the difference between these 3 bodies? Why do we have them? Is there duplication? And so this was, and there was duplication. And so this is an effort to streamline, make sure everyone is playing fair in the sandbox of revitalization, but everyone knows what their role is. And a good example of that is So myself and the Heart of Our City are often asked to support a specific business or promote a specific business. That's not our role. Our role is to look at the collection of groups, nonprofits, organizations, people, places in the downtown and provide feedback and commentary and work. Whereas the downtown BRZ, their role is to support business. It's to advocate for them and it's to market. And that role in itself has blurred a little bit over the years, and we want to pull it back and make sure that we're all doing what our mandates tell of us or are directing us to do.
Okay, thank you. Ms. Johansson, did you want to add anything to any of that?
No, I don't have anything additional to add. Andrew nailed that one pretty well.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Crowson.
Or as I move all my buttons. Hello, Lorian. Always good to see you. Hello, Andrew. Thank you for the presentation. There's a few things here that I think are chicken and the egg, and I think we got the right one going forward. One of the things we hear a lot about from 13th Street North and from the warehouse district is that opportunities are closed to them because they don't have a BRZ and or BIA. And we keep saying to them, well, go create one and then we can work with you. But what I'm hearing from this presentation is that if we expand Heart of Our City into the warehouse district and up 13th Street North, that could in effect encourage the BRZ or BIA to be created. So my understanding that that's one of the things we're looking at is if we move into this area, then perhaps the support is there for the businesses to maybe look at another opportunity as well.
Yeah, I think you've captured that very, very well. The Heart of Our City is a committee who can support and advocate and collect community feedback and then share that feedback with council. So by expanding their mandated boundary, technically they can now, I mean, there was always a little bit of feedback there, but now in alignment with their mandate, they can open those conversations up with folks along 13th Street North or Warehouse District, and it's in alignment with their mandate. There's a secondary piece to that to say whether or not the city would support those areas financially, and that would come up in the next operating budget, or if it was immediate, we would bring that forward sooner. Currently, the operating budget that supports much of this effort in the downtown is called the Downtown Redevelopment Fund. So hypothetically, over the next 2 years, if this expansion took place and conversations opened up with folks in the warehouse district, and we were there to support them in the creation of a BIA or BRZ, that by the time the next operating budget came forward, there might be a positioning where we have an additional ask of operational dollars to help support and be directed directly to that district. I think one of the challenges and one of the feedbacks that administration has given to those groups in those districts is that if you just want money directed to your district today, who do we engage with to make sure that that money is going to the right place? An example would be, we just did a planter replacement project in the downtown. We had met with the BRZ, a collection of 550 businesses, and they asked for that to be a component that we spend some money on. If we went into the warehouse district and did that, and all of a sudden 40 businesses are now saying that's not what we should have spent our money on, it's a process that we can never really move forward on. Whereas if there's a voice that represents whether it's 200 or 500 businesses in that area, we can move forward with more certainty and more comfort in that the money that we're spending in that area is in fact helping that business district or that area out.
In the Heart of Our City plan, there is a lot of work in that plan about housing and real estate. And I know years and years ago when I sat on Heart of Our City, we talked about a downtown development authority, something like that, something that would actually be able to strongly promote development in the downtown. And it looks like that is one of the things this governance review is also suggesting, is that a primary focus, again, be housing and real estate. But this is suggesting, rather than a new group, to meld the urban revitalization and real estate. How is that plan to work? Do we have any ideas there? Do we have any timeline? If we move ahead on that, what is the plan?
Yeah, so I think it's probably maybe a hangover, Belinda, from back in your days. Is there was this concept of, should we have a development authority that was kept being brought up by members and by certain council members and people from the public. And so that was one of the primary questions that we put in front of WMC. And so they have went out and evaluated other organizations or other cities, municipalities and their efforts. And they came back to say, yes, you need to focus on real estate and land and housing, but in Lethbridge's context, you'd be creating almost a fourth organization to add to this mix. And in fact, you have a body already created and operating in real estate and land. They just maybe are going to open up or extend their focus from being primarily about Greenfield to adding something else in their toolkit. In terms of how that might play out, I might default to City Manager Craig Dalton to speak about that.
Well, of course, since real estate technically counts as the board of directors for real estate, that's another conversation. So, Mr.
Yes.
Dalton, what do you think?
Yeah, so there's lots of work going on behind the scenes, and this Western Management Consulting piece of work just added to the work that we'd already started to move in that direction. So we hope to be in front of, and maybe Andrew can help me here, I think it might be the Economic SPC by the end of the March, with a proposal for a new organization that might be called Opportunity Lethbridge, that would wrap up a number of initiatives, including this one.
So all these things kind of moving together at the same time with different.
Yes, and some other pieces that aren't really pertinent to this conversation, but yeah, just better organizing inside the corporation to perform this important function, but others related to economic development as well.
And this is not really a question, it's a statement. There is so much I love about Heart of Our City, but the people who are contracted to write that plan decided on names for our community and for neighborhoods that are not the names for those neighborhoods. So as long as we move forward with that plan, knowing none of their names apply, I'd be fine with it. I'm done at that point.
Thank you, Councillor
Croson. The value of a business district is they could decide how they want to market their area.
Or they could talk to the historical side of it. We'll talk later.
Thank you, Councillor Croson. We're always uncertain as where you stand on history, so thank you for clarifying that position. Councillor Croson, or Councillor Carl, sorry.
Thank you. Yes, I'd love to know what the Broadview district is or was. So that was actually one of my thoughts as well. The joy of not putting your hand up early is many of your questions are already asked. So I've got maybe some weird questions. First, thank you, Ms. Johansson and Mr. Malcolm, for the information and presentation. Appreciate it. Mr. Malcolm, can you tell me a little bit more about URD?
Yeah, you bet. So when the Heart of Our City Master Plan was approved back in 2007 by Council, one of the initial recommendations or implementation steps was to establish a center point within the city organization as to coordinate these implementation efforts. And at that time, it was called the Downtown Revitalization Manager, and that position lived within planning and development. And it was a good spot for it because the work was stemming out of a master plan. We had to do a downtown area redevelopment plan. We had to look at things like land use. It was all very planning based. As we crept forward into 2018 and 2019, specifically with a challenged economic environment, our clean and safe issues related to the drug and opioid issues, and just more and more challenges, as well as the implementation steps starting to get much beyond the efforts of planning and development. We started to spread out and start to have much more activity or day-to-day activity outside of planning and development. So when we no longer had a director of planning and development, the conversation was, where does this best fit? And at that point, it was moved into the city manager's office and more or less rebranded as urban revitalization because the scope was now beyond the boundaries of downtown. And the boundaries of downtown were causing an issue because some of our, I'll say, our lightning rods were outside of the true downtown area. And so that's where this started to go. And then it seemed to gain a little bit of momentum. And so as we went through this process, we really had that conversation to say, do we need to put the brakes on it and refocus just to downtown, or is there value in looking at this broader urban core area? And it was the latter that we had support for from the various organizations and the WMC.
And thank you for that, because that was going to be the focus of the point of my question, that the URD is not strictly focused on downtown, even though a lot of the verbiage in all the documents does say downtown, heart of the city, yada, yada, yada. You have expanded. You are more of the urban core.
Yeah, so the best way that I can describe that is, I mean, the urban revitalization department is basically a department of one. So my efforts, were primarily just to downtown. If it was across the street on the other side of Stafford, didn't deal with it. Sorry, not in my purview. As it changed, we started having to support those businesses, at least through administrative processes, connecting them with how to move through a development permit, how to, maybe access other grants and incentives. But the funding to still do the initiatives, so the activity grant, the clean sweep program, some of those things are still tied to the budget source, which is the downtown redevelopment fund. So we're in this transition period right now where we're going to hopefully expand our heart of our city support for those other areas, and administratively we'll support those other areas, but still financially we're not there yet, and that'll probably come with the next operating budget cycle.
Thank you, Mr. Malcolm. I appreciate that. Sort of following similar lines, but now focusing more on the HOC. I think in one of the buckets was the governance review talked about future opportunities to support other districts. And I think in there it talked about waiting for them, and I think this is what Councillor Croson was sort of touching on, to create their own BRZs or BIAs, and then we could support them and help them. Is there a way, failing them, those other districts creating their own BRZs, BIAs, is there a way to support and help and guide now rather than waiting for the future state where Westminster or the warehouse district or what have you, Broadview, create their own BRZs? Is there a way to support them now? And I'm wondering if that's been a discussion.
Yeah, I think that's where we want to go. So right now, as of today, without an amended terms of reference, the heart of our city would be acting outside of their mandate to be lending any sort of support or even their ear to these other areas. Mm-hmm. So we wanted to kind of realign that so that if they were having those conversations, it met their mandate. In terms of the role of administration, we are already in the position to support those businesses by, helping them navigate, permitting processes. We are now providing them grants and incentives through past decisions of council to expand those areas. So we're very much supporting them today. It's just not in terms of things like new planters or coordinated public realm enhancements, because we don't have that body of which to coordinate with. And that doesn't necessarily need to be a BIA. It could be a neighborhood association, which would be similar but doesn't have the tax component. And I think it's important to note that, a BIA is something that is formed under the Municipal Government Act almost entirely based on the businesses themselves. The city just acts as the body to put in place the bylaw and then to collect the tax on their behalf. They are making the purposeful decision to be taxed something extra in order to put that organization in place. And so we can't mandate that. We can help them through that process, but until they come to the table and say, we want to do this, our hands are a little bit tied. And then again, connected to the budget thing is, unless you have some sort of organized or some sort of organization on which to run those ideas by, it's really hard to then be putting other public dollars there without some sort of certainty that you're doing the right thing.
Gotcha. I get that. Then turning to the terms of reference and the amendments you're asking us to forward to council, was there any discussion on the current composition of the groups that are members? I think there's is it, I think there's 4 community members and 9?
Nine.
Thank you. 9 organizations. Was there any discussion on the appropriateness of those, or appropriateness of adding others? And I'm thinking that perhaps the community members could be folks who are either business owners or residents of those other districts. So that could be a way to connect with those other districts. But I'm just wondering about the actual composition, the membership. And I wouldn't want to say keep expanding it, because huge boards get unwieldy. But are the ones that are involved right now the appropriate ones? And how have you had that discussion?
At a very high level. So there was, in the governance report, it wasn't a big enough item to form a recommendation, but it was identified that we should look at the composition of the committee and determine whether we should just have representation on 9 organizations and then those members of the public, or whether it should be smaller and based on a skills matrix that ensures that we have, you know, a diverse set of skills and a diverse set of representation. You know, we have a great deal of great organizations, Lethbridge Historical Society, Economic Development Lethbridge, Chamber of Commerce, who are all on there. But is that really what we need? And we didn't have that conversation. We're just flagging it here as something that we would like to pursue and have more conversations on over the course of this year, and extend an olive branch to this governance SPC to say, do you want to be involved or help us in that conversation at all? Because it would be changing the way that Heart of Our City has existed for the last better part of a decade. And we don't know which way is better yet. It's just, we want to have that conversation.
I appreciate that you're thinking of having that conversation. I think it's an important conversation. Mr. Chair, my final question, if I can. It's always been Heart of the City, the revitalization committee of downtown. I get pushback on that. They say, dear God, it's been 14 years that you've been funding this for $500,000. Certainly it's revitalized by now. Ever thought of just calling it the Vitalization Committee? Keeping it vital? Continuing with the vital? I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, that, and at the base of that is around that metrics and that reporting. When I'm asked how, you know, can you tell me how have revitalization efforts gone? Mm-hmm. Well, you know, talk to people, they feel it's pretty good. You know, we still have some safety issues, but the buildings look great. But there's no hard data to share. Like, you know, we've moved from point X to point Y, and that's going to be a huge purpose of this exercise, is to start to roll in metrics that are reported on a regular basis, so that we can start to really share the story of what we're doing here. And then as it relates to what term to use, I like revitalization. I just like to spin it that revitalization is a constant process. We're continually changing, continually addressing other needs. And so, you know, we just keep on going. It's a process that's never complete. Even the best downtowns that you can think of in the world, they are still doing revitalization efforts. It just depends on the scale.
Thank you for that. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Morrow, do you have any questions?
Just one, which I've asked many times, and I might as well ask it again, just to hear if I get the same answer back, or maybe something that might excite me a little bit more. And that is, why do we even have Heart of the City? That's to Andrew.
Well, I think in alignment with the governance findings and everything, is we have Heart of Our City to have an ear on what the community wants to happen as it relates to our downtown or our core. And I think we were getting pulled in a couple different directions, and then it became a little muddled as to why or what the role of Heart of Our City is. We want to pull that back, and truly the key role of the committee is to have their ear on the ground, talking with the community at Broad, and bringing forward their perspectives as to what we need to do in the downtown and the urban core. But again, it's a creation of the city council. So if city council does not think that's the direction, or that does not think we need a committee in place anymore, that would be a council decision.
Well, and I understand that, and I know you used to be with the city, then you left for a little bit, and then you came back, and now you've got this particular role. And if I understand a little bit, your role under the city management of Craig has expanded a bit, and I'm just curious, what you just said, would that not be the role of the downtown BRZ? And again, it's, to me, it's duplication, and I've always thought that we need to focus more on just the downtown, because the heart of the city seems to focus mostly on downtown, but there's many other areas in the city that I think need at least our attention and our support, and I don't seem that they're getting it as much as the downtown, simply because of the downtown BRZ and the heart of the city. So if I can get your comments on that and make me feel a little bit better as to the importance and validity of heart of the city.
So I'll in the governance review, there's that Venn diagram, and I think I would draw your attention to that just to describe that there is a different role by each of the groups. The downtown BRZ is specifically for the district that they have decided is their boundary. And their role is to support business. And as their mandate suggests, it's only business. So if there was a performing arts center, or CASA, for example, or Southern Alberta Art Gallery, they're actually non-profits, they're not businesses. And so if they were looking for support as their relation to their district that they're in, the BRZ is not mandated to necessarily support them. The Heart of Our City Committee provides that greater perspective, that greater lens of all the different pieces that happen within that area. And by expanding their mandate to not just be downtown, I think the committee will be in a better position to lend their support to those other areas that I think you're referring to. So I think this is a process, or what we're outlining in front of us, I think is starting to move ourselves to where I think your hopes are. At the end of the day, the downtown will still have more focus because they have that BRZ in place right now. If other districts got organized, coordinated, and established a BIA, I think they would be very much on the same grounds as the downtown is today.
Thank you.
So just, Mr. Malcolm, if we can just take Councillor Moore's question and refocus a little bit. If we're talking about concierge service to the traditional downtown, plus extending that out to the east as well, up 13th Street North, is there a wisdom, again, acknowledging and recognizing the Municipal Government Act and the legislation around the BIA, BRZ requirements, is there a wisdom in having a conversation this time about creating or establishing one organization so that we have a more of a focus for the community, more of a one-stop for the community, as opposed to, well, where am I going? Am I going to URD? Am I going to HOC? Am I going to BRZ? And I know that the WMC doesn't talk about that, but I don't know if that conversation has floated around anywhere.
If I may.
Oh yeah, sorry. Go ahead, Ms. Johansson.
My thought on that is that this is part of what we're attempting to address with this governance review, is that clarification of who do I go to with this problem or this concern, so that it is very clear to business, to members of the community, to all of the different sectors of our city, which organization they go to, rather than having that muddied. And I've had this conversation with people personally, who does what? And so being able to very clearly state that, if it's a business problem, you go to your BRZ BIA. If it's, you want beautification of your streets, you want planters outside your business, you go to the HOC. If it's something where you want to do land development and you want to build housing, you go to the newly conglomerated Department of URD and Real Estate Land. And that clarification that we're attempting to get to with this step is really going to help to define those roles, and then to make sure that we take steps in the future to make it easy for people to know which one to go to, and then that there's communication. And this is the first and important first step for us in getting to that point.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for the clarification, and thank you for recontextualizing it for me as well. Then just to paraphrase back for you, this is more about clarification of roles as opposed to looking to create any sort of large organization that would create a synergy or the pooling of resources, so to speak. It really is about clarification of HSC role versus BRZ versus URD. That's what I'm hearing.
So yes, I believe that we have all of the people and organizations in place that we need. We simply need to make it more clear who needs to help you with what.
Okay, thank you. So again, back to a question then on timing. Obviously, council can amend terms of reference at any time, but if part of this then is getting that sort of clarity of mandate right, and especially in terms of asking the community, are we meeting your needs? Are we doing what it is that you're expecting us to do? Are we still putting the cart ahead of the horse a little bit before we go out to the community to ask that question? Are we meeting your needs? Are we serving you as we're hoping we're serving you? Should we be waiting to be changing, solidifying mandates in the terms of reference before? Should we wait until after we get that response back?
I guess that would be good feedback to receive from this group, as well as potentially the Civic Works SPC next week. We feel like the time is now. We have completed the governance review, and again, multiple iterations might come of this, but within the development of the governance review, the BRZ was interviewed, city council members were interviewed, city administration was interviewed, and there was a selection of businesses that are not a part of the BRZ that were interviewed. And then on top of that, somebody like myself in my role, I'm exposed to business and community conversations on a daily basis. I hear the frustration in terms of maybe we're not doing as well as we should in revitalization. I think all of those pieces together have informed that I think we're moving in the right direction. It could take a different, if the new council in October and November has a different strategic plan in place, we could go a completely different direction with this. But up till now, I think timing is good to keep the ball moving, get a better structure in place so that we can actually meet the challenges of today. We are, I think Lorianne put it very well. We can't sugarcoat it. We were dealing with regular challenges of revitalization that were then compounded by an incredible challenge with the drug crisis, which was then further compounded by a poor economy in oil and gas, and then a further COVID-19. Like downtown is got a huge uphill battle. I shouldn't even say downtown. Our urban core has a huge uphill battle ahead, and this at least helps us make sure that we know what we're doing when we're asked to help. Otherwise, we might be kind of just swimming around for the next year or two without that defined purpose.
Okay, thank you. Acting Mayor Higgin, did you have any questions?
Nothing for me. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, Councillor Carlson.
Whoops. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just a quick question. We've had this discussion at other SPCs. Sometimes we don't know if there's members of public in the building or wishing to comment. I wonder if we could maybe just get into the practice of checking.
Thank you, Councillor Carlson. I'm not certain what the process is because my team screen, of course, just shows city staff and members of council and invited guests. Mr. Westerson, are you still there, or is it Ms. Hilford now?
No, I'm still here, and
okay.
There is no registered speakers. There is no one in chamber as well wishing to speak to any of these topics currently.
Excellent.
Thank you.
Thank you. I will attempt to get in that practice after or during each agenda item. Thank you very much for that reminder. If there's nothing else, thank you both for your presentation. Mr. Westerson, if you could put the motion up on the screen. And I heard the potential of a amendment to it. Mr. Malcolm, were you asking about Governance SPC actually wanting to participate further in this process?
Well, we had just we had flagged that we were not changing the composition of the committee at this time, but we had flagged it as something that the Heart of Our City committee would like to investigate further over the course of this year. And so the extension was whether or not the governance SPC would like to have any involvement in that, either by attending a Heart of Our City committee meeting or by the Heart of Our City coming back to a future SPC date to specifically have that conversation.
Thank you. Members of the committee, thoughts on that? Councillor Crowson?
Yes, please.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Morrow?
I'm not quite sure if I know what you're asking or what Andrew just asked. I think I do, but can I might be out of line here. I'll tell you where I don't want to move any further with any of this stuff, because as long as I've been here, as long as council created Heart of the City, there's been nothing but in my mind, a mess and confusion. And many times I have walked to downtown. I'm a downtown guy, and I've asked businesses one by one if they knew who Heart of the City was, if they knew any people on Heart of the City, if they were represented by Heart of the City, and I got nobody that even knew who they were. And in my mind, nothing's changed. So if you're asking me any direction, I'd like to see Heart of the City and downtown BRZ get together, figure out who does what. And I know we've done this before, because they've come to council before and they've said that they each have a unique role. Well, even today, I still don't see that unique role. So I'm not prepared to move forward with any of this until downtown BRZ, Heart of the City get together and maybe come up with one group that represents not only them, not only the downtown, but maybe expand a little further. Because I get upset and I cringe when I hear that all the problems are downtown, because there are problems everywhere in our community. And so I just think we need to expand our focus. And I don't think downtown BRZ and I don't think the Heart of the City really meets the need of the community. If they say that, I'll accept it. But I don't believe, from the people that I'm talking to, the businesses that I'm talking to, that this is working. So we need to make a change, and maybe it needs to come from council. Thanks.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Morrow. I think reflecting on some of the commentary in the WMC report, as well as what Ms. Johansson had stated, this is part of what is being attempted here, is to create that clarity, that fidelity of who does what. What does the BRZ do? What does HOC do through this process of basically a governance review, changing the terms of reference to meet the need? If I can respectfully suggest, those that you speak to, Councillor Morrow, then really need to participate in this process to help provide the input, provide the guidance, and if it leads to hey, there should just be one organization, I think everybody is accepting of that sort of outcome. At the moment, though, it is a process intended to clarify what roles people are doing, or to clarify the role of the HOC for sure, because this is a governance review on them. Mr. Malcolm?
Just wanted to hop and say that the creation of one organization is something that is frankly not possible, because the BRZ is established under their own process to be who they are under the MGA, with a defined boundary. A lot of this work started with the conversation around, would you consider extending your boundary to support some of those businesses in the quote unquote warehouse district? And they said, no, we do not want to expand our boundary. Downtown has an identity defined by the boundary that it is. And if we extend and become any bigger, we lose our focus and we can't support our businesses. That was their angle. And they are entitled to take that perspective through the fact that they are established without the city really mandating anything. The Heart of Our City, on the other hand, is something that is much more at the kind of the whim of council in terms of how big it is. And that's why we want to extend that, so that at least at the level that we can control, we're providing that extra support for those other businesses and those other areas that are very much struggling. And then we are further encouraging them to have their own BIA organization that then represents their values. It's a tough place to be in, because I can understand where Councillor Morrow's mindset's going in terms of, let's have one body, but the way that they're organized, we're talking about two different, very distinct processes from a committee council and an organization established under the MGA as a BIA.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Morrow?
Yes, sorry, and I don't mean to get into debate, discussion, or disagree. I'm totally understanding that I think we all want the same thing, but I think we might be approaching it differently. But I need to say, when the downtown BRZ speaks, and I have a tremendous amount of respect for the downtown BRZ, I think they work very hard. However, when they have their AGMs, they're lucky if they get 10 people at their AGMs. So I think we'd be fooled if we believe that when the downtown BRZ speaks, they speak on behalf of their 700, 800 members. And that's the part that I think is missing. The downtown BRZ, we as council aren't connecting with the 700, 800, 600, however many members there are that form the downtown BRZ. So I guess I'll point the finger to myself and council that maybe we need to do a better job in understanding and finding out what all members of the downtown BRZ really want. Because I don't believe that the half a dozen that go to these meetings and speak on behalf of BRZ is representative of the entire downtown BRZ. So again, I'm not trying to argue. We're throwing stuff out here, and I would be remiss if I didn't throw that out there. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Yeah, no problem. And this is the beauty of democracy. We don't have to agree. We can all see a similar end. Sometimes it's the means of getting to that end. And I think everybody involved in this conversation wants to see a revitalized or vitalized or a vibrant downtown core. I know yourself included, Councillor Morrow. It's just achieving an end mean for all of us. So based on your statements then, Councillor Morrow, you would agree then with the governance SPC being involved in this process in order, as you state, to make that connection, provide the opportunity for the non-AGM participants, give them a place, give them a space to come and express their thoughts, their interests, their values.
Absolutely. But again, it's not us giving them a place for them to come. They're busy trying to earn a living. I think we need to find a way of connecting with them. It's the other way around. We need to reach out. Thank you.
Okay, excellent. Thank you. Councillor Carlson, your thoughts on the question at hand then in terms of participants with participating with Heart of the City on that?
Thank you, because I had forgotten the question. Yes.
Okay, thank you. Excellent. Do we need that included then in the motion on 4.2, just so that we know where we're going?
Mr. Chair.
Yes.
Just one, I think maybe Mr. Johansson, Mr. Malcolm answered this already, but let me just get 100% clarity. Would our SPC's involvement be beneficial?
I think so, based on the comments and the questions today. I think that we want to make sure that the committee is moving in a direction that best supports council as a whole, because that's why you've determined you need a Heart of Our City committee, is to have that group of community members that have their ears to the ground and are bringing back perspectives. So we report technically to the Civic Works SPC, but I think in terms of the fact that we're talking about a term of reference and community representation, I think the Governance SPC is the right place for that discussion to take place.
Ms. Johansson?
I would concur with Andrew's statement that specifically when you're discussing the composition of a city committee, having the Governance SPC involved and that second set of eyes on it is always a wise choice.
Thank you. Thank you. I appreciate those responses. And it's triggered another question in my mind, if I can, Mr. Chair.
Yes, go ahead.
Is there, HOC reports to Civic Works. Is that the appropriate place for reporting? Or is it this committee?
I think we've had the conversation before when it comes to the SPCs, that if there are specificities in what is being requested. Committees have the ability to go to multiple SPCs as long as we stay in our wheelhouse around the areas of governance, oversight of the terms of reference, things of that nature, and don't wander into Civic Works SPC and vice versa. And having said that, we have overlap because there are two members of Civic Works that actually serve on governance. So I think we're astute and we'll hopefully be able to keep the two straight. So the process was established such that while HOC is under SPC's, I don't want to say mandate, but umbrella, there's a flexibility and a welcomeness to go anywhere.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Okay, so that being stated, then we'll just accept, deal with motion 4.2 as presented. Be it resolved that the Governance Standing Policy Committee accept the presentation as information, and further be it resolved that the Governance Standing Policy Committee recommend that City Council approve the amendments to the Heart of Our City terms of reference as in attachment 3. This motion is made by Councillor Carlson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, for assigning this on the fly to Councillor Carlson. Just a question, Mr. Westerton or Ms. Crisanti, can you just scroll down a tiny bit? Okay, thank you. I'm sorry, I just misheard. So we are recommending to City Council. So this will form part of our Council's consent agenda if we forward this to Council, correct?
Correct, yes.
Excellent. Unless there's any further debate or comments, I will call for the vote and thank the presenters for the work.
Thank you. Councillor Croson, you're on mic. Did you have something you wanted to add?
No, just ready to vote.
Excellent. Thank you. Do this. All those. Are there any opposed to this recommendation? Okay, hearing none, that is approved. Thank you very much. Thank you both, Mr. Malcolm, Ms. Johansson, for your presentation, for your work on this, and we look forward to seeing you again in the future.
Thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you.
Have a great day.
Thank you, you too. Before we move on, do members want a 10-minute bio break?
I'm
sorry, Councillor. Yes.
Councillor Carlson, I think, said yes to a break.
Yes.
I'm fine with a break. I just need to let you know, Mr. Chair, I do have to leave at 3:59 to join another meeting. So thank you.
Okay. Hopefully we have this out of the way by 3:59. So let's be back at 3:13. anyone back?
Yes, sir.
Councillor Morrow, you're still there?
Yes, I am.
Excellent. Councillor Croson is back.
I'm high jumping now.
Okay, good. Well, we're a minute early, but let's get started if we can. And I noticed Mr. Butler had like 6 screens surrounding him. I don't have that, so bear with me. So we'll go to agenda item 4.3. Mr. Westerson and Ms. Betteridge, I believe.
Yes.
New council and committee report template. Please go ahead.
Excellent. Well, we will try to keep this presentation as brief as possible. You've had this circulated in your package for the last week or so, and if there are any questions at the end, we are more than willing to answer those. So next slide. These changes that we're proposing to these forms are in response and in alignment to the feedback that we've been hearing and collecting from council and administration over the last several months. Revamped our governance model back in November as well, and that became effective January of this year. And this is challenging us to think more about how we manage the flow of information to each of the decision-making bodies that we have, be it council or SPCs, and at the same time, how we present the information to the public. The new meeting bodies require additional time and thought into our reports. And currently, there are 5 different report types that people have used or are using. We need to streamline this into one report template across all the different meeting bodies and to drive the best information to both council, public, and the administration. Each of these new bodies will be encountering many items, typically before council, prior to the change, and require in-depth information that will drive their recommendations to council. Decisions require information. We recognize that we cannot be perfect, but we also recognize a duty to driving thought and detail into the preparation, presentation, and delivery of our reports. This will ensure decisions can be made with the best information while demonstrating a commitment to delivering as much of that information as possible. Our previous forms had sections that were redundant, confusing, or not useful. We were not being asked to provide the right information through these reports. Each report is written in a different manner, varying levels of detail, varying lengths, and varying focuses. This is not conducive to good information delivery and ultimately decision-making. Much like a contract, we look to standardize the sections so that the report can be easily read, understood. This will assist not only with the decision-making, but the perception of administration and information sharing. When our previous forms are completed, sections are left unanswered, which does not assist with the delivery of our information. Rather, it creates gaps, which leads to a loss of transparency and ultimately the erosion of the trust, respect, and confidence that we strive to achieve daily. As our community evolves, we have an obligation to evolve with them. This means that we need to drive the thought-provoking questions of, what does this mean for the community? What impacts will this have on the well-being of our community? What are the short and long-term budget implications? And what is the risk involved with this? These questions, amongst others, are questions that have been observed in council and in broader community discourse. Our current forms do not assist us in delivering the written clarity in our answers to these questions. Next slide, please. Excuse me. The next 2 slides are a general overview of some of the findings that we had in some sit-down consultation meetings with members of council as well as members of administration. These are the broad themes that we had seen or heard in these sessions with each members of council as well as administration. The council requests administration to think about the following when drafting reports. It says anticipate the questions. Remember, the audience is both council and the public, something that is really one of the cornerstones in the development of these new forms and templates is that we're trying to deliver much more clear information to both the public and council. Not all council members feel well informed after reading a report. Most important sections to council are the summary, the engagement, the background, and the options, the pros and cons, and the presentations, driving a bit more of a templated feel, a shorter condensed format and feel. From administration, there again is some general findings on the next slide as well about what we heard from them. On the next slide, we have an analysis that we did of several different municipalities that we'd seen across Canada, seen as best practices in how they deliver information to their municipal councils. I really want to get to, though, however, our current template that's on slide 6. This is the current request for decision template. And then on the next slide is the proposed template. On the proposed template, you'll see varying different titles and or section headings that have not necessarily been in place on the previous forms, or rather are there to drive some discussion. Same information or the same template to deliver information not only in public sessions at SPC and council, but also in closed sessions as well, with minor adjustments with a confidential watermark and a thought bubble for FOIP clauses. And I'll end with the last slide being if there are any questions. Also available for questions here is Ms. Hilford, the city clerk, and Ms. Betteridge.
Excellent. Thank you, Mr. Westerson. Councillor Carlson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Mr. Westerson, and everyone who worked on this for us. And now I've closed my page. Darn it. One thing that jumped out of me was, I think it was called, I've lost it, strategic alignment, I think it was called.
Yes.
Thank you. And one of the things that's in there that's new was justify. And I really like that because quite often when somebody's preparing a report, they look through council's strategic plan and say, oh yeah, we'll call this one governance, financial stewardship, and there's no connection. So how are we going to explain to people what justify means?
Definitely. And I'll rely upon Ms. Hilford and Ms. Betteridge as well to back me up. But here, internally, as part of this, we are rolling out a bit of a report writing guide for our administrative team here at the city. So within that is going to be some lessons on how to read a strategic plan, a council strategic plan, as well as the corporate strategic plan, and how to explain it on that form. That's the big part. And as we move forward, getting ready to implement these, and in conversations with our colleagues, we'll be outlining that exactly to them, is explain it, clearly identify which section. One of the often identified sections of council strategic plan is the accountable leadership component, but it's often left hanging as that just heading. But what portion of it, because there's approximately 6 subsections of accountable leadership, what portion, why does it meet that? And alternatively, and on the other hand, is if it doesn't align to the council strategic plan, identify why, and identify why it's here in that same sense.
Thank you for that. I appreciate that. I think it's going to be awesome. Now, this is only council or committee report. Are there any recommended changes to other requests, other groups, other folks who want to communicate with an SPC or council? Sort of a template for them to fill out, or is that being considered?
It's part of the discussion around this. Currently, if you want to address an SPC on any topic, there's a form that is to be filled out on lethbridge.ca, and that is the template. It's also stood up for public hearings as well. Sorry, I'm getting a weird echo here. I apologize. But not necessarily as of yet. And as we move towards kind of this one template feel for each of these bodies, we'll be looking at how we integrate information that may come from an external body, say an external board, committee, or commission that doesn't necessarily fall within the purview of an SPC or something.
Thank you.
Ms. Hilford, did you answer that?
Yeah, if I could add, I echo what Mr. Westerson said, but I think a little bit more thought will have to be put into reports from externals or boards, committees, commission, because they are a little bit different. They're coming from different entities. They'll have a different approval structure. So we may have to go back and do a little bit more engagement with council and administration to figure out what is the best fit for a template or whatever we're looking for those organizations and the public as well.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Appreciate that. Ms. Hilford, I love your palm trees and cabanas. Jealous.
Oh, don't be.
I can confirm Ms. Hilford is in Lethbridge. She has not traveled. Councillor Crowson.
Thank you so much for this, because yes, I think it's been one of the things you've heard from every member of council. is there's just not enough information sometimes to make a decision. And so you're, looking for other information or hoping you'll find it. What I really like about this is the analysis and options, because guaranteed, whenever there's a recommendation brought forward to us, one of the questions is going to be, well, did you consider this? Did you consider that? And why not? And so if it's in the report already, one, it keys us to ask good questions. But it also reminds us that staff has looked at various things before and why decisions have been made. And that was sort of a comment, but under community citizens, there's social, economic, environmental. Is there just some way of highlighting that those are not all-inclusive, that those are 3 things you might want to look at? How is it going to affect the community from a social and economic and environmental, but don't limit yourself there? Because there may be something that we just haven't considered is going to affect the community from a recreation perspective, right? Like, I just find when if those things are listed, just have a little thing going, other things may apply, because I know some of us are very literal, and they'll only fill those in if those are 3 listed. So just things like that is, think of the very literal mind this time. Not
Carlene,
literal mind.
Carlene put some research into this. Did you want to comment, Carlene?
Sure. I think in a lot of the analysis part and looking at different municipalities and what they were bringing forward, we wanted to keep in mind just creating a more all-encompassing type of perspective and trigger words within the guidelines that really help guide the people who are writing them to cover those topics. So while absolutely I agree it's helpful to provide some direction, and that could be part of our report writer's guide, which goes alongside the entire template. But part of that community citizen section is to really include a lot of those social movements that are very prominent today, to make sure that we are considering all aspects of the community and that projects do impact various elements. So absolutely, Councillor Crowson, that's one thing we can consider as well.
And I like how that is very prominent, because we should always be thinking, how does this impact the community and the citizen? Like, that should be vital. So I like how it's such a prominent section. I always just worry, I guess, maybe I taught elementary so too long maybe, but if you say, these are the things, nobody goes outside of those. So that was my one question there. I'll leave it to see if anybody else has questions.
Thank you, Councillor Crowson. Councillor Morrow, did you have any questions on this?
No, thanks, Mr. Chair.
Okay, thank you. Just to sort of follow up a little bit, in terms of what's being proposed, I noticed that it has sections, and I'm assuming that this is the priority in which things will come based on the feedback that you received. Oh, Mr. Dalton, did you want to add something to that? I see that you're back. Well, you've washed the tears from your eyes from watching the budget.
I can wait, Mr. Chair.
Okay, thank you. I noticed that options and then implementation plan. So Mr. Dalton and Mr. Westerson and I actually had this conversation. I personally prefer options being put in front of council. There are some things to which options may not exist or may be limited based on technical expertise, based on legislation, things of that nature. And so that would actually end up being a recommendation as opposed to an option. But ultimately, as the governing body, we should be provided with options. The challenge being then, if you're providing council with 3 options, how do you respond with an implementation plan unless the plan includes how we would implement each of those 3 options? Has there been thought or consideration given to that? I'm just going to look and see who on mics first. Mr. Dalton.
Yeah, so we've had conversations around options versus recommendations. And ultimately, I think that would be a good conversation to have with council, because I think really at the end of the day, it's council receiving this information for the purpose of making decisions. And so if there's a preference, we'd be happy to follow it. I think our preference is, and I think most of us have been trained and raised to identify options, but also in the process, make a recommendation. But I would also offer too that there are some cases where if the decision or the issue is entirely political, that it's really not appropriate for administration to make a decision that is really in the political realm. And then there are cases where it might be a wastewater issue coming forward that's highly technical, could involve legislative safety standards and those types of things where we clearly want to make a recommendation. So it's, yeah, I think there's a couple of different ways to go there. And we're obviously open to getting feedback from council. And if there's a preference, happy to follow it.
Thank you. Can I ask my colleagues then on SPC just brief thoughts on that? If you have thoughts about options versus recommendations, Councillor Crowson.
I think it also depends if it's coming to an SPC, right? SPC, we're supposed to be having these discussions. So at an SPC, I can see it being much more options, and then we make the recommendation onto council. So give us the information and and tell us which one, pros and cons of each, and then let it up to us. So I also think it depends on, as Mr. Dalton said, on the issue, but it also depends on where it's coming to, because I would like much more fluidity of conversation at an SPC, because the SPC then is the ones that are recommending something to council. So I think that also has to play into it. Leave it, in some cases, you have to leave it to council to come up with the final recommendation. But yes, if it's an electrical thing or something like that, please don't give us a bunch of options. We kind of need your support in what to decide on those ones.
All right, Councillor Morrow. Thoughts on options versus recommendations?
No, I don't really. No, I don't have any thoughts at this moment.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Carlson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I like recommendations. I don't always follow them, but I like them. I understand what Mr. Dalton is saying, that there are some things that are really, it's not administration's job to make a recommendation. If somebody's saying what color the paint should be, I don't think Craig needs to say, I like beige. But if it's something that the administration, who we hire for their expertise and their knowledge, has a thought on, I'd like to hear the recommendation. I can always challenge it or put forward my own recommendation, but I like recommendations. So that's me.
So language matters. You can certainly have options with this is the preferred option of administration, which in effect becomes a recommendation. And it sort of goes back to that mantra of passionate advice, loyal implementation. Ultimately, it's for council to decide. And if council decides plan B as opposed to plan A, then that's what's to be implemented. So I would assume then, Mr. Dalton, you get the joyful task of being the that point on the hourglass. You get to decide whether it's an administrative decision or if it's a political decision. Is that the process that would be entailed?
I'm certainly good with that. Yep.
Okay. However, so I guess I think what Mr. Dalton and I had discussed, and as he said in his comments about this going back to City Council, if it's going to be recommendations, then that line should just say recommendation, because I think it's a false narrative to say options. Council has options, but it is always coming back as a recommendation on the rare occasions where it's a political decision. So do we wish that to be listed as options with the administrative recommendation? This is administration's preference. Again, ultimately the governance decision lies with council. So even on the technical ones, we just have, I think we'll all fall back on Mr. Purkis being the wise one on electrical issues. If that's the option or the preferred direction, then that's the preferred direction. But options versus recommendations, it might just be me. Council should always be about options, not recommendations.
I see it differently. When we had a recommendation earlier to accept as information. I'm fine with that as a recommendation because there wasn't anything to send on. So I mean that to me is a recommendation. It's just something simple, like this isn't ready to be taken on to council yet. But for me, where it becomes an option is going, you can spend 500,000 and get this, you can spend $1 million and get this, then I want to look at the options. So I think there is a difference when a recommendation comes in and when an option comes in. And so to me, they're not the same. And when it's a decision about spending money, when it's a decision about which we think is best for the community, then I want to see the options.
Okay. Anybody else on that? Is it just me and my whole words matter things? Because if it is, then. Okay, not. Oh, Councillor Carlson, go ahead.
Sorry, Mr. Chair. I'm having trouble hitting buttons and trying to get information on the budget. Sorry. So what are we really trying to decide here? Are we saying that we would like recommendations from administration, except when Craig, being the pinch point, says this is not an administration doesn't have a recommendation. This is a political decision. We'll provide you all the information. But I'd be fine with that. But if there are recommendations saying, yeah, you can spend $1 million and get this, you can spend $2 million and get that, we wouldn't recommend spending $2 million because you'd drain your MRSR or whatever it is. So our recommendation is this. I'm wondering what we're trying to decide here.
I think, as I'm saying things out loud, I think part of it is where something is in the process, right? Because at SPCs, we see a lot of things are not done yet. They just want some feedback, and that's a recommendation. It's just for information. So it's also where things actually are in the process. Are they actually there for a decision? Are they there with options? Or they, so it's also part of that timeline.
Agreed.
Yes, I agree. And again, I think we're all bright enough to recognize, I guess for me, it comes to me, the word option means something different than a recommendation. And it's how I contextualize the information. Absolutely. Mr. Purkis is going to provide an option, but which one, Mr. Purkis, do you think is what? That's the one we're going to follow. But ultimately, as governors of the organization, it is incumbent upon us to make decisions based on what we feel is best. And we may not support administrative recommendation. That's fine. Again, this might just be me in the way that I contextualize the decision-making process as one who governs. But like I say, it's not a hill I'm going to die on. And I've heard back from some of you on this, and we can just continue forward. Mr. Dalton, your hand is up. Was it still on this, or is it on something else?
Just something tweaked when you were speaking there, Mr. Chair, and again, I think this maybe not to all, but I certainly think it's an interesting conversation because it challenges the entire way I've operated in every organization I've been in, which is always you bring options, pros, cons, advantages, disadvantages, and you take advantage of the experience and expertise that was involved in developing those options to make a recommendation to a decision maker. And when you just talk about a board environment, even in the boards that I've reported to, they wanted recommendations, didn't always follow them. But again, we're happy to go with that hourglass option too, whatever the direction of council is. And it's not black and white. I certainly understand the perspective of wanting to receive options and not a recommendation as well.
Would it help if it just administrative recommendation? That's just administrative.
Yes, I think that I was thinking that earlier. Actually, that language might be helpful.
Thank you, Ms. Beveridge. Oh, sorry, Councillor Carlson, did you have something?
I was just going to finish with that. That's exactly what is in my head. Is administrative recommendation, because I think we ran into that at a recent committee meeting when there were options provided, and some committee members said, well, all options are perfect. And others said, no, there's one that's actually being recommended, but the language was vague enough that there wasn't actually a recommendation. So I like administrative recommendation. I do like that.
Ms. Betteridge.
Thank you. One of the, when considering the titles and what we're putting in the report and the feedback that we heard from council and administration is this concept of plain language. So I agree with you that wording is absolutely important. And in looking at the analysis in other municipalities and seeing what stands out and what makes sense to the everyday citizen who's reading a report, I think is also very important when considering what these headlines mean. That they make sense to you, but they also make sense to the public. So in providing these plain language headings, if we are going to define them, also define them in a way I think that would make sense to the public when they're reading the report. So I do, yeah, absolutely agree that the words and the language are important, but also a consideration as well in this debate.
Okay, thank you. Now, Acting Mayor Hagan has his hand up. Ms. Hilford, did you have something on that point? Okay, go ahead.
I did. It was with regard to administrative recommendations. I think we meant to put that in there. And as the reports go from the SPCs to council, it would state what administration's recommendation was and then what the SPC's recommendation was. And so it's very clear on who's recommending what and such like that. So we can definitely put in administration's recommendation and then make it clear where in the process or who's recommending in the process when, if that helps.
Okay, thank you. Acting Mayor Hagan.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And sorry, I got booted out there for a second. Not booted, I'm sure I lost connection, but
yeah, it was totally accidental, Blaine. Yes, yes.
So no, I was just listening to you. I hopped over to YouTube quickly until I got back in and was watching. And I, Mr. Chair, I completely agree with your comment regarding options. And I wish I could have put up my hand back there because I do like options. I think options over a recommendation. And I think we'll see a recommendation from a standing policy committee is possibly not being the right thing, because if we look back on our last council meeting, a recommendation coming from an SPC, it was a recommendation. Maybe there should have been options there, and we could have spent a lot less time than 4 hours on a mask bylaw or 3 hours or whatever it was. So I agree with you. I do like the options. I think they're important, and it gives better clarity to what, it may pick what works for one councillor and not for another, but there's options there to go through. So I do like the idea of options. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Morrow.
Well, thanks, Mr. Chair. I wasn't going to say anything about it because we just seem to be hung up on words. And I guess one word can make a big difference. But if we're going to talk about words and specifically certain words, quite frankly, I don't like the word administration because if this is coming to council, we only have one employee, and that's the city manager. So if a recommendation is going to come, I want it to come from the city manager, because administrative, I don't know who that is. Is that Perkins? Is that the third manager down below doing all the work and recommending it all the way up? So if we're going to get stuck on words, the only recommendations that I'm going to take is anything that comes from the city manager.
Okay, thank you. I think that's what we heard Mr. Dalton say in terms of decision maker as to what comes through as a recommendation or as an option. And then in the language, it would be presented as a recommendation by the CAO. Thoughts on that? Sorry, Councillor Moore, did you have something else? Your hand is still up. Okay, thank you. Mr. Dalton, were you going to say something?
I don't have an issue with administrative. I understand Councillor Morrow's point. I also wouldn't have an issue with city manager or CAO recommendation. It's the same thing, because if the recommendation comes from administration, it's coming from me at the end of the day. But I'm not against that wording.
Okay.
Although I would note that I would be on the hook an awful lot.
you already are.
I'm just kidding. No, I'm happy with that.
I found an old 1970s bylaw that actually said if the amount of money was overspent, the city clerk was on the hook. So we could go back to those old bylaws if you'd like. That, you know, the estimate is off, we blame the city clerk.
Was that city of Lethbridge, Alberta, or Newfoundland?
Nope, it's a 1970s bylaw on a construction site here in Lethbridge. I can send it to you. City clerk that was on the hook.
Oh dear.
Stunning.
Sounds great.
Are there any other questions on what's been presented? Do you require any additional direction from us? Oh, Belinda, sorry, Councillor Croson.
Just a question about, this is a new thing that we'll be seeing, but from what you've seen, Bonnie, in other places, and Carleen in other places, how long does it take staff to fill something like this out? How much training is going to have to go into it? When's the timeline? When can we, if this gets passed by council, when can we see this initiated? That sort of stuff.
Well, we're working on a report writer's guide as well that would complement the report template and help administration fill it out and understand it. So this would go to council probably March 9th, and then we'd finish off with the guide. So maybe April, May. I'm going to ask Carleen and Ryan to weigh in. They've been working very hard on the guide and the template. So
go ahead, Carleen.
Sure. I think, Councillor Croson, to answer your question about how long it takes for people to complete the report, it's what we've heard from those who have provided feedback. So it really depends on how comfortable they are with providing the information, and it depends on the topic. So completing the report, it just matters the complexity of it, how they write. I know there's a lot of feedback about they're not too sure about what content to put in or style. So part of what we'll be including in the report writer's guide is the City of Lethbridge writing guide and how to write plain language and how to do technical writing. And all of these guidelines, really, at the end of the day, that will help speed the process so that more people are comfortable with writing reports. So it's very dependent on that. And of course, City Clerk's office will always be available to help along the way with all the questions as they come in, so we can help guide them with writing effective reports. So training can happen as well in person for those who are nervous or those who require a little bit of extra attention, like the same with presentations as well. It's all encompassing. The approach that we're going to take when it comes to implementing this. But with our initial launch, all of that supporting material will be ready to go. So in terms of the reports coming through, it will be dependent on how people proceed with filling out the templates, but we will be here for them.
So we need to be aware, and we need to make our colleagues aware that some people are taking on a big new challenge with this, and that they're going to be doing a new report, and that it's not going to necessarily be perfect right off, but we're moving towards a better reporting system. Okay. Thank you.
Just one final question for me. One of the things that you identified, Mr. Westerson, in terms of process is anticipating questions of council. There have been a number of times over the years that you ask something simple like, you know, what's in the budget for that? And there's not an immediate answer, which I can sometimes understand. How many staff? Is there a process? Is there something in training and getting people to think about what questions would council ask on this? Is there something that's included in that writing guide? Trigger questions, teaching people to be more anticipatory?
Definitely, and actually in the guide itself, we've actually identified some of the most common questions that we have heard time and time again for the last 12 to 18 months in that report guide as well. On top of that is kind of stretching kind of the minds of the report writers when we introduce this to them to get them to really anticipate that what may be coming up. You'll see at the bottom of the report as well, there's a new section. It's called consulted or consultation. Sorry, I don't have it right in front of me and I can't recall what we had wrote. And that's about not only consulting with your maybe your business unit, your colleagues, but the broader organization in of itself. And so if there is a budget implication or you're not sure that there may be a budget implication, it's about reaching out to the other business units that are part of our organization, be it finance or be it a legal or risk component, be it a recreation and culture lens, and trying to identify the questions that may come within those different those business units or those functions, and then being able to be prepared not only in writing that report but also answering that in the part of the presentation itself.
Okay, excellent.
Great.
Thank you.
Now I have to come up with better questions so you're not so predictable.
Can I mute her somehow? Do I have that button on my iPad? Thank you. Are there any further questions on that? All right, hearing none. Now, Councillor Morrow has had to leave because he has a meeting at 4 o'clock as well. Question on quorum, is it 2 or is it 3?
It's 3.
Is it 3? Okay, so that being the case, can we see the motion on item 4.3, please?
It's coming up right now.
Thank you. I have a motion from Councillor Crowson. Be it resolved, the Governance Standing Policy Committee recommend that Council receive the information, the proposed report template. Councillor Crowson.
Just to clarify, are we just moving it for information to them, or are we recommending that they adopt it?
I believe this is an administrative change that's occurring in support of the work of council, so it's not up, correct me if I'm wrong, somebody please, it's not up to us to approve or not. This is for information as to what's going to be coming forward. Is that correct, Ms. Hilford?
That is correct, yes. We wanted council to be aware of it and to have some feedback to it and such, so that they knew what was coming, because it is part of the process of council making decisions. So it will be a change.
I note it's a recommendation, not an option.
Oh, can I recommend that we do then what we did with Civic Works? If this just gets stuck in the consent agenda, it's going to probably be ignored by some people. Can we do it as an update so that they are aware that it's coming instead of putting it in the consent agenda? Because
we can change that motion right now, that it be placed on the update section or wherever you'd like it, submission, whatever works for you. You can place it right there.
I'm okay with that because it's coming from the chair, Councillor Kaufman.
I would suggest a submission, because if it's in the consent agenda, members of council are voting on it. If it's an update, it's just here. So if, well, what do we need to vote on? It's being done. So maybe yes, as a submission is probably, or as a update is probably fine.
Okay. I just don't want them to be surprised if they miss that part.
Will the motion and the information then be attached to updates? It'll be in written form for people to see prior to the meeting?
Yeah, we'll make that happen.
Excellent, thank you.
And with all of that, I will just call the question.
And by consensus, that is approved. Excellent, thank you very much. Is there something, 5.1 or 5.2, one more significant than the other, requiring an outcome? Sorry, I'm just going to turn off my camera so I can split my screen here.
Mr. Chair, I believe they're just being presented as information
okay.
to yourself and members of the committee.
Okay. Any questions then on 5.1, the operational review implementation plan update?
Jeff here. Sorry, Mr. Chair.
Go ahead. Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Councillor Carlson.
Sorry about that. Just a quick question on the, oh gosh, sorry, I'm scrolling, and the red line where it says not started or at risk. Those can be two completely different things. And I'm just wondering if that could be perhaps maybe right now, I think they're all that are highlighted in red, they say not started. But is there a reason that something could be started but at risk is my question.
Yes, there is. But if it's not started and at risk, there should be a comment there to describe what we're doing to mitigate it if we can.
Okay.
Or we need to put a clearer update in there to explain that.
Okay, thank you.
All right, thank you. I know Mr. Vanden Heuvel's on the line here, so I'm sure he's captured that. If there are any further questions on that?
My final question on that is the the ones that are at risk or not started, are there any that council should be concerned about, Mr. Dalton?
Yeah, I'll ask Tony to weigh in here as well, but not at this time, no, to my understanding. But Tony can jump in if I'm off base there.
No, thank you. Currently, there are none that are at, that we're raising as a concern from council, and I think that's that comment section there to the right that should have a descriptor in there. So I will work with Gerald to make sure that if there's not a descriptor, it clearly indicates that it's not started. It can be as simple as that. We'll get that fixed for you.
Yeah, no worries. I just, if something's at risk, I want to know if we should be worried about it. So thank you.
Yeah, I appreciate that. Yeah, you betcha.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Okay, if there are no further questions, then 5.1, have a motion moved by Councillor Carlson. Be it resolved that the Governance Standing Policy Committee receive the operational review implementation update as information. Are we all good with that? Excellent. Thank you. Item 5.2, monthly council work plan update. Any questions regarding the work plan update?
Nothing was highlighted. Nothing was highlighted as not started at risk, so I'm not worried.
Mr. Dalton, I'm sorry, I should have probably done this for the previous one as well. Is there anything in particular you're wanting to highlight?
No, not at this time, but I might just quickly mention a couple items that'll be coming to council shortly to update, well, this committee first off on progress, and IT came today. HR is coming shortly. Mr. Van den Heuvel is going to come forward March 25th, I believe, on our response to a couple of the key findings, including the performance management framework. And we have a couple from phase 2 that out of infrastructure services that are coming shortly as well. So nothing to pull out today, but just that's a forecast of what we'll be bringing forward in the near future, as well as we're due to update on a couple of transit initiatives. So there's there'll be an update coming in the next couple of weeks on Accessoride and CityLink / on-demand transit.
Okay, thank you. For first blush, from what you saw in the budget today, are we going to be seeing some reds and yellows appearing on this and on the previous document as well?
I haven't seen anything on the budget yet. I'm trying to.
Oh, that's why you're in a good mood. Okay, thank you.
I'll be in a good mood after I see it. It'll just be something else to put on our list.
Excellent. Okay, thank you. That being the case, if there are no further questions, if I could see the motion, thank you. Item 5.2, monthly council work plan update from Councillor Croson. Be it resolved that the Governance Standing Policy Committee receive the council work plan update 2021 as information. Councillor Croson.
Absolutely, I accept it, and airport should get going on that. That's all I'm going to say.
Yeah,
all right.
It's a bad committee.
By consensus, that's good. Thank you very much. Item 6.
Mr. Chair,
yes.
if I may, if we could maybe jump to the items coming out of in camera, because I do have to sign off. And
yes, there is nothing to report on 6.1. So if we could move to 7.1 then. I'll read it on my phone because it might actually be bigger. So item 7.1, public member appointments to boards, committees. Be resolved that the Governance Standing Policy Committee direct that the closed meeting discussions and documents with respect to public member appointments to boards, commissions, and committees remain confidential pursuant to sections 19, confidential evaluations, 23, local public body confidences, and 24, advice from officials of the Freedom of Information Protection of Privacy Act, and further be resolved that the Governance Standing Policy Committee recommends City Council proceed with the confidential direction provided during the closed session. Councillor Carlson.
So moved. Unless there's any further debate, I will call for the vote.
Question has been called. All those in favor? Opposed? That's carried unanimously. 7.2, organizational representative ratification to councils, boards, commissions, and committees. Be it resolved that the Governance Standing Policy Committee direct that the closed meeting discussions and documents with respect to public member appointments to boards, commissions, and committees remain confidential pursuant to sections 19, confidential evaluations, 23, local public body competences, and 24, advice from officials of the Freedom of Information Protection and Privacy Act, and further be it resolved that the Governance Standing Policy Committee recommends City Council proceed with the confidential direction provided during the closed session. Councillor Crowson.
Question.
Question's been called. All those in favor? Hearing none opposed, that is carried. That only leaves adjournment. Motion to adjourn, Councillor Carlson.
Yes, please. I got to run. Thank you all.
All those in favor? Thank you. Thank you, everyone, for your work, for your information, and for support today. Appreciate that.
Bye, Al. I'm in meetings till 6. Wish me luck.
Good luck. Thank you. Thank you, Craig. Thank you, Ryan, for all your work. Thank you, Chloe, as well, for keeping